There is something deeply unsettling about watching a man who built an entire career telling other people how to love suddenly go silent about his own marriage. For over 2 decades, Steve Harvey stood in front of cameras, behind microphones, and on stages across the world, preaching the gospel of commitment, loyalty, and relationship wisdom. He sold millions of books on how to think like a man. He coached women on what to look for and what to walk away from. He made family the centerpiece of his brand. And yet, behind that carefully constructed image, something was shifting, something that the cameras were not capturing, and that his media empire was not addressing. And when he finally opened his mouth to speak about it, what came out shocked people in ways they were not prepared for. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the fame, but the beginning of the man. Steve Harvey was not handed anything. He came from Welch, West Virginia, a small coal mining town where options were limited and ambitions were often buried before they could breathe. His family relocated to Cleveland, Ohio, where he grew up navigating a world that was not exactly laying out a red carpet for a young black man with big dreams and no clear path. He tried everything. He worked as a boxer, an insurance salesman, a carpet cleaner, a mail carrier, and an auto worker. None of it stuck. None of it felt like the thing he was supposed to be doing with his life. Then on October 8th, 1985, he walked onto the stage at the Hilarities Comedy Club in Cleveland, opened his mouth, and found out who he was. The audience laughed. They connected. They responded. And something that had been buried under years of dead-end jobs and quiet desperation finally had a direction. But the discovery of his gift did not immediately translate into a comfortable life. Comedy is one of the cruelest industries for people just starting out, and Harvey paid every single one of those dues. He traveled from city to city, chasing stage time, sometimes earning barely enough money to make it to the next stop. At his lowest point, he was living in a 1976 Ford, sleeping in parking lots, gas stations, and rest stops, washing himself wherever he could find access to water. For roughly 3 years, that car was his home. He had no guarantee that the next performance would pay enough to keep him going. He simply kept driving, kept performing, and kept believing that something would eventually break his way. That kind of hunger does not leave a person. It becomes woven into everything they do afterward. When you have slept in a parking lot with nothing but a dream keeping you warm, you do not take the spotlight lightly once it finally finds you. And eventually it did. By the early 1990s, Harvey's national profile was beginning to build through television comedy showcases. His reputation on the stand-up circuit was growing, and the rooms he was playing were getting bigger. Then came the moment that transformed his career from regional success into national phenomenon. His association with the kings of comedy alongside Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hughley, and Bernie Mac turned into one of the most celebrated comedy tours in American history. When Spike Lee filmed it in 2000, the resulting concert film grossed over $38 million at the box office. Steve Harvey was no longer just a working comedian. He was a star. Television followed. His sitcom, which launched in 1996 on the WB network, ran for 6 seasons and over 100 episodes. His nationally syndicated radio show launched in 2000 and eventually reached millions of listeners across the country every single morning. Then in 2009, he published a relationship book that became a cultural event. It hit bestseller lists, sparked arguments at dinner tables, inspired a film franchise, and cemented Harvey as one of the most influential voices in American popular culture when it came to love, marriage, and how men and women relate to each other. When he took over as host of Family Feud in 2010, he breathed entirely new life into a show that had been around for decades, turning it into a viral content machine that introduced him to yet another generation of viewers. By the mid-2010s, Steve Harvey had assembled one of the most impressive multimedia empires in American entertainment. The man who once had nothing had built everything. But the foundation of that everything was always his personal story. And his personal story was never as clean as the stage version suggested. Long before Marjorie entered the picture as a symbol of his stability and success, Harvey's private life was already a complicated archive of painful chapters. His first marriage to Marjorie Harvey began in 1981 and lasted roughly 13 years. They had 3 children together, twin daughters and a son. The marriage dissolved as his career was starting to gain traction, and the separation unfolded during a period of significant personal and professional transition. Then came his second marriage, to marry Lee Harvey, which began in 1996 and produced a son named Winton. That marriage lasted about 9 years before arriving at a legal endpoint in 2005, triggered by a divorce filing in Texas. What followed was not a quiet legal separation that faded out of public view. What followed was a prolonged, messy, increasingly public battle that spilled out of courtrooms and into media cycles in ways that Harvey clearly never intended. Mary Lee Harvey made serious allegations, publicly and through legal filings, describing emotional distress, mistreatment, and broader misconduct claims that generated headlines and ignited discussions about who Steve Harvey really was behind the motivational speeches and the television smile. While those allegations were never conclusively established through final judicial rulings, they did not disappear. They floated through the cultural conversation like background noise that never quite went away. The custody dispute over their son Winton stretched on and generated additional friction as competing claims and legal filings continued making their way into public view. At one point, Mary Lee Harvey released online videos and statements reiterating her version of events, which circulated across early social media platforms and amplified the conflict far beyond anything a courtroom could contain. Courts eventually issued restrictions on both parties, limiting what could be publicly discussed about the ongoing proceedings. Mary Lee Harvey was found in contempt of court at one point for violating those restrictions. The entire episode became a recurring subplot in the public story of Steve Harvey's life, one that contrasted painfully with the polished messaging of his professional brand. And then there was Marjorie. Marjorie Bridges, as she was known before their marriage, had actually been part of Harvey's orbit years earlier, back in the 1990s during his struggling comedian days. They had known each other before the fame and before the empire, and when they reconnected later in life, both having lived through their own separate experiences and relationships, something clearly clicked in a way it had not before. She brought 3 children from previous relationships. He brought 4. Together they blended a family, and on June 25, 2007, they made it official in a private ceremony. For years, the Harvey marriage looked like the success story to end all success stories. A man who had failed at love twice, who had been through the courts and the headlines and the public humiliation of a messy personal life, had somehow found his way to something that looked stable, genuine, and lasting. Marjorie became more than a spouse. She became a visible partner in the construction of the Harvey brand. They traveled together, appeared together at fashion weeks and charity galas and red carpet events, and projected a unified image of luxury, family devotion, and shared purpose. Her own social media presence grew into a platform of its own, with millions of followers watching her document a life of international travel, coordinated fashion, and high-profile engagements. She was not standing behind the brand. She was part of the brand. And for a man who had made his name telling the world how love was supposed to work, having a marriage that appeared to confirm everything he preached was an enormously powerful asset. But visibility always invites scrutiny. And for the Harveys, the scrutiny never really stopped. One of the most persistent rumors that followed them through the years was the allegation that Marjorie had been involved with Steve while he was still married to Mary Lee. Harvey denied this categorically on multiple occasions. He addressed it in interviews, rejected the framing, and pushed back publicly against the narrative. But the rumor proved resilient in the way that certain rumors do when they attach themselves to figures who are both widely admired and widely scrutinized. Every time the couple appeared in a major media feature or lifestyle spread, the old allegations would resurface somewhere online and begin circulating again. Then in 2023, something shifted. What had previously been background noise became a roar. A wave of social media speculation exploded across platforms, carried with allegations that Marjorie had been unfaithful during their marriage. The claims were specific in some versions, naming individuals described as close to the Harvey household, including personal staff. The narrative spread with the kind of velocity that only digital platforms can generate, replicating across entertainment commentary accounts and gossip channels faster than any response could contain it. Within days, the word divorce was being attached to the Harvey name with a confidence that the underlying evidence did not remotely support. Here is what the verified record actually showed at that point. The Harveys remained legally married, No divorce proceedings had been filed. No credible investigative reporting confirmed the allegations. No documentation supporting the specific claims circulated beyond anonymous assertions and amplified speculation. Major entertainment news organizations did not confirm the story. Yet the sheer volume of the online conversation gave the narrative a kind of momentum that felt, to many casual observers, like confirmation in itself. That is precisely how the modern rumor ecosystem functions. Repetition substitutes for verification. When millions of people are talking about something, the question of whether it is actually true can get lost in the noise. Steve Harvey addressed the rumors directly. He pushed back in public appearances and interviews, rejecting the narrative and describing his marriage as stable. Marjorie Harvey addressed it indirectly through her public messaging, signaling family unity and declining to give the speculation the dignity of a detailed response. They continued to appear together publicly. They continued their shared projects and philanthropic engagements. The visible record did not match the digital narrative at all. But the damage that online speculation can do to a public figure's reputation does not always require a verified foundation. The association alone leaves marks. What Harvey eventually broke his silence on went deeper than rumors. After 20 years of performing a version of himself that centered on resilience, wisdom, and the idea that he had figured out something important about how to live and love, he began to speak more candidly about the cost of that performance, about the gap between what audiences see and what actually happened behind closed doors, about the pressure of being the person who gives advice about relationships when your own relationships have at times been the subject of public controversy, about the weight of building an identity around lessons that your own life has not always perfectly illustrated. There is a particular kind of silence that successful people maintain, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying it honestly would complicate the story they need people to believe. For Harvey, that story was always the arc of redemption, the man who slept in his car and built an empire, who failed in love and then found real partnership, who made mistakes publicly and owned them. That arc required a certain amount of narrative control, and maintaining narrative control requires silence about the parts that do not fit. When that silence broke, what emerged was not a confession of wrongdoing. It was something more complex than that. It was an acknowledgement that 20 years of marriage to a person, especially a person who is also your business partner and your public co-brand, is not a simple thing to sustain under the weight of fame, scrutiny, rumor cycles, and the expectations that come with having built a public identity around relationship wisdom. Harvey spoke about the pressure of that position, about what it means to be the person audiences look to for answers about love when your own love life has never been without its complications. He spoke about the experience of watching rumors attach themselves to someone he loved and being unable to stop the spread, unable to fully correct the record, unable to protect someone from a narrative that had been built entirely from speculation and amplification rather than fact. He spoke about the way fame changes relationships, not because the feelings change, but because everything surrounding those feelings changes, including who gets to have an opinion about them, who feels entitled to comment, and how much of what actually happens between two people gets swallowed up by the version that exists in public. What made this moment register so deeply with audiences was not its revelation so much as its honesty. Steve Harvey has been performing for decades. Stand-up comedy is performance. Television hosting is performance. Motivational speaking is performance. Even the marriage, in its public dimension, had elements of performance woven through it, not in the sense of being fake, but in the sense of being curated for presentation. What the breaking of his silence represented was a moment where the performance paused long enough for something less polished to come through. The man behind the mustache, behind the suits, behind the catchphrases and the Bible verses and the bestseller list and the game show set, had 20 years of things he had not fully said out loud. And when he started saying them, people listened, not because they were scandalous, but because they were true in a way that things are true when they've been held back for a long time and finally find a way out. Steve Harvey's story has always been about survival, surviving poverty, surviving failure, surviving homelessness, surviving the collapse of relationships, surviving public humiliation, surviving the relentless churn of a media cycle that is always looking for the next angle. He has survived all of it. And now, 20 years into the marriage that was supposed to be the final chapter of the personal redemption arc, He finds himself navigating something that no amount of motivational wisdom can fully script in advance, which is the honest reckoning with what a life in public actually costs a private person living it. Whether his marriage ultimately becomes another chapter of survival or something else entirely remains to be seen. But what is clear is that the silence is broken, and sometimes that is the only real beginning there is.